gang.
Hey, Coach. How we doing?
Y'all fire away whenever you're ready.
All right, rock and roll.
Coach, I asked this question to Coach Grubb yesterday, but what's the balance between fundamental instruction and install, and as you get deeper into camp, is it harder to maintain that balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, when you're a team in year two, offensively, defensively, there's certain liberties that you get to enjoy right in the first 5-6 days of fall camp, because you can carry a larger catalog of defense and offense than we would have, you know what I mean, in spring ball, in fall camp a year ago, because our guys understand it, right? They know it. We've been doing it over and over and over again. And really, for these freshmen that are coming in as mid-year enrollees, you know, that's one of the things for me to be able to do with them when our other coaches go on the road recruiting. Grubb and I are sitting here, you know, spending time with them, meeting with them, installing before we ever get to, you know, spring workouts and then spring football. And then, you know, the summertime we go through the installation. And so by the time you get to fall camp, you can do a little bit more. But always, right, you know, it always comes back to the fundamental elements, right? And it's hard to move on schematically if you're not where you need to be fundamentally. And I think that we've certainly taken a jump in that direction in year two.
What are some things you can do now in the offseason and fall camp to increase the sack numbers this season?
Yeah, so, you know, that was one thing that, you know, if you point to some of the areas that we had to improve upon from last year, you know, being able to create negative plays in the backfield, being able to affect the quarterback, certainly from a standpoint of creating more sacks defensively. It was something that we needed to look at. So fundamentally, we tweaked some things, and schematically, you know, just created some more variance in some of the things that we're doing in passing downs. I think we're in a good spot right now. I think, you know, that's an ever-flowing, you know, okay, what does this team do this week? How elusive is their quarterback? How do we want to contain him and also, you know, force pressure and those things? And so, you know, week to week, those things are going to change. But if you build a catalog of defense in the offseason, those are things you can kind of go to week to create variance in what you're doing.
Kane, it seems like you guys have plenty of pressures last year. I'm curious about how you guys drill, you know, once you put the pressure on, that difference, those finishing moments, you know, the ones that turn pressures into tackles for loss and sacks. What is the, I guess, how are y'all training that? What does that look like on the practice field to make sure that happens?
Well, there's creating the opportunity to make the play, right? And ultimately, production comes when a guy, right, executes his job and then he can finish on the ball carrier, right? We talk to the guys about this all the time, you know. Before the ball is snapped, all right, before you make a play, you know, what does it take to bring a grown man to the ground, right? You gotta ask that question to yourself internally so that you are in position to physically go execute and bring a grown man to the ground. And so then the fundamental aspect of that, right, is we work all different variations of tackling. So we have tackle circuits that are focused on like pre-contact before we ever get to the point. Did we put ourselves in position to leverage the ball and then work to a proper contact tackle? So then we have a contact tackle circuit, and we do different variations of tackling, right? The actual act of the tackling itself. And then like today we worked situational tackles, right? So things that show up, you know, with a quarterback scramble, goal line tackle, vice tackle in open field, swipe desperation tackle, right? Those are all different variations of being able to ultimately make the play when it matters most.
When you look at last season, sometimes the rush defense was really good, sometimes it fell off a little bit. Was there a common thread when it did struggle?
You know, I mean, I think, you know, schematically, when you're dealing with 1+ style offenses, right? You know, you're going to be more effective in the run game when you use all 11 bodies in the run game. That's just, you know, simple math and numbers, right? And that's about as far as I can go with math and numbers, right? But when it comes to being able to stop the 1+ quarterback run, right? Those are elements where you have to have numbers and leverages at the point of attack, and you gotta count for one more person out of the core. And so there's certain elements to, you know, do you want to sell the farm, right? And say, hey, I'm tired. I don't want to give up a 4-yard run every now and then, but at what cost, you know? And that was one of the things I think we did a good job of last year, is limiting explosive plays and finding ways to create enough negatives as the season went on, right, to be able to get the offense into second and long off schedule style plays. But naturally, when you deal with a quarterback run system, you're just going to give up a few more yards in the run game, and unless you want to play that game, right, of where a guy can throw it over top. And to me, the game of football now is about limiting explosives that the offense can create, especially in the passing game.
Clay Russa talked about James Harrison being a guy that he loved to watch play. What kind of power do you see from Quay? And I mean, obviously him and James are two different body types, but any crossover there?
I haven't thought about it necessarily from that perspective, but James Harrison would be one that I would want Quay to play like as well. I think Quay is on a team full of freaky people, Quay is the freakiest. You know what I mean? He is freaky athletic, and I think he's a special talent in terms of his strength. You watch him at the point of attack. When we started talking about violent hands, which is one of our Bama fundamentals that we continue to stress and harp on, Quay's ability to destroy blocks and get off and make plays. There was a play against Auburn, a guy came and pulled against him. I mean, absolutely obliterated him at the point of attack. Those are things, right, that show up on tape in terms of his strength and physicality. But ultimately, right, it's about knowing, what I like about Quay is like knowing when to and when not to, from a physical standpoint, be too aggressive. And I think he's learned a lot last year with the experience that he had, and I think he's what I would call, has turned himself into a controlled, aggressive player.
What's it like working with Coach Grubb, and how do you guys complement each other?
Well, we're both really competitive people, and so in that way we don't compliment each other at all. But it's fun. It's fun competing against him every day. The experiences that he has had and that I've had, and we've never got to work together, but it's really enjoyable talking ball in the off season. I think when you see the game from a holistic view, which I think both of us kind of see the game, we have an appreciation for the other side of the ball and what's good scheme and what are good fundamentals, what are the things so we kind of bounce those ideas off of each other, which is really great. I think we're both aggressive in nature. We have kind of an attacking style mentality. We're going to be aggressive offensively, we're going to be aggressive defensively. There's a variation of scheme things that we do, right? I'd say we probably both carry a decent amount of scheme. But ultimately, what's fun about him is that he has a sense of urgency to better his side of the ball. And hopefully if I get up in the morning the right way and take the steps right to do the same thing defensively, right, we are the pushers, right? The coordinators are the ones that are holding everybody accountable to the standard, right, from a detail standpoint of accomplishing the vision that we have in our heads, right? So he's fun to work with, really enjoyed it.
How comfortable is Justin Jefferson, like on the field in your scheme? What have you seen?
Well, JJ is a very instinctive football player, and I think schematically we're built for instinctive players to be able to cut it loose and go play, right? So there's certainly an element of discipline that any great defense has to play with, but there's certain creative freedoms and instinctive freedoms that we try to tap into schematically on defense, and I think JJ, this is a really good fit for him.
How's Noah Carter coming along?
How's Noah
Carter coming along?
Yeah, Noah's doing a really good job. I think it's so fun, watching guys grow in their discipline, and usually sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then ultimately it just starts to click. Yanze Pierre is a great example of that. This is Yanze's 3rd year.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Yanze's 3rd year for us, and you're starting to see, him just take those steps in the right direction. This is Noah Carter's 2nd year, and you see him taking steps in the right direction, but eventually there'll come a point where, if he'll keep pushing, you just see a massive step that a guy takes, and then all of a sudden he's a different person from a maturity standpoint, from a discipline standpoint, from accountability, and so it's fun to be able to kind of watch those guys move in that trajectory.
Coach, moving to an interior standpoint, can you just talk about what you've seen from the interior of the Alabama defensive line from guys like Jeremiah Beaman and other guys like Tim Kane and that group and stuff like that?
Yeah, you know, I mean, obviously having TK back for another year is huge. Not just the, you know, physically and who he is as a football player, but the accountability that he has in that room for a bunch of other younger players. I think he does a great job of holding that room accountable, of pushing the standard in that room. You know, Beaman's a great example of a guy that grew up fast. You know, where he was a year ago as a true freshman at the beginning of the season to the role that he played for us in the bowl game and played it well, to where he was in the springtime to now. I mean, this dude has made great strides. You know, he feels like a veteran player out there, even though he hasn't had some of the reps across the last season that maybe even Zabian Brown or another true freshman had. And so really proud of those guys. I think, you know, Freddie and Jamie Mosley, those guys are doing a great job of really pushing that group from a physicality standpoint. These are the dog days of fall camp where you got to kind of push them through. You know, big guys, they got to be pushed, you know, right now. They don't naturally want to run around the field for, you know, 60 snaps or whatever it may be, including individuals. So like the direction of that group, but certainly their maturity and development is going to be a huge indicator to our success.
Charlie, you got one last
Yeah,
question?
you bring back Keon and Bray at safety, but what have you seen from the guys behind them from like a depth standpoint?
Yeah, you know, I don't want to put the cart before the horse saying this here, but I do think to this point we have shown a significant amount of maturity and development from our defensive back room. You know, you think about where we were going into the Tennessee game a year ago, and I think I've mentioned this to you guys before, right? We played 6 players for 5 positions up until that game, right? And I'm talking the vast majority of the snaps when it mattered most, right? And then 5 of those guys went out. And so, you know, we are in a much better position now with the depth, and I would say probably one of the more aggressive turnarounds that I've ever seen from one year to another year in terms of guys that you trust to be able to get on the field. And I think that's a tip of the cap, right, in terms of what Courtney Morgan and our defensive staff have done in recruiting. And then I think the development that you've seen from Maurice Lindquist and Jason Jones to bring those young guys along has put us in a position to go compete at a much higher level this year than from a depth standpoint than we were a year ago.
Thank you, Coach.
All right, thanks guys. Roll Tide.
Thanks, Ken.